Welcome back to the 1 in 3 Speakout, hosted by Advocates for Youth. I'm Jess Pierce, and I'm privileged to be one of the hosts for this historic event. We are beginning the 5th hour of the first ever online abortion Speakout. Throughout the day, we'll hear from over 100 people talking about their experiences with abortion care. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to the many people who are joining us with their personal stories. As many of you know, 1 in 3 women will have an abortion in her lifetime here in the United States. Despite the fact that abortion is a very common thing, we rarely openly talk about our decisions to end a pregnancy. For too long, conversations around abortion have been dominated by politicians and anti-choice activists who use shame and stigma as a tool to silence people and to advance legislation that limits access to abortion services. Today, we are working to build a new conversation, one that is grounded in the lived experiences of real people, one that works towards building community rather than isolation, compassion rather than shame. We are shattering the silence. We honor the long tradition of speakouts that started on the eve of the historic Roe v. Wade decision. We also honor the long tradition of storytelling and social justice movements, the tradition of placing people and their lived experiences at the center of the conversation. Today, Advocates for Youth is grateful for the opportunity to host and bring together people from all around the country to break through the stigma and shame people are made to feel around abortion and to highlight the real people's experiences and stories around abortion care. In this Speak Out, we heard from Jacqueline, who is putting together the 1 in 3 play based upon abortion stories from Advocates for Youth campaign. Emily, who filmed her abortion in order to demystify and destigmatize the process. From Dr. Willie Parker, an abortion provider and fearless advocate for women's health. And we heard from many, many others. All of us have a role in shattering the stigma and ensuring that women have access to safe and legal abortion care. So today, if you have a personal story and you would like to share it, just visit www.1in3campaign.org to share your written or video story. I'm joined now in this hour by Carly Winks, a 1 in 3 campaign student activist at the University of Michigan.
Thanks, it's great to be here. I've been doing this work for a little while now, and I've joined up with Advocates for Youth in the 1 in 3 campaign probably about 2 years ago, and it is probably one of the most meaningful things that I've been able to do to create space for people to share their stories and seeing how needed it is and how necessary it is that we have a place for people to share their experiences.
I would like to encourage everyone again who's watching to go online to our website and sign our pledge to end the stigma and shame around abortion. You can sign right on the line at www.1in3campaign.org. Carly, will you introduce our first guest?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Our first guest is Jackie, who will share her abortion story via Skype. Jack, start whenever you're ready, please.
Hi, I'm Jackie, and I had an abortion when I was 35 years old, 3 years ago. I was pregnant for the second time and had a 2-year-old boy. I was excited to be pregnant, but I could tell from the beginning that something was very wrong. I think maybe having been pregnant before, I just had a feeling and knew something wasn't right. And at my first prenatal visit at 8 weeks, the ultrasound was fine. The midwife we had suggested that we have the early quad screening for chromosomal abnormalities. So we scheduled the ultrasound, which takes place at 11 weeks. And in that ultrasound, the doctor saw very large abnormalities and suggested that we might have diagnostic testing that day. We spoke for a few hours with a genetic counselor before we had the test, and then we did, and then we waited. And those 48 hours until we received a call from the genetic counselor were just sort of terrible. And the call we received was one that we really didn't want to hear. We knew from that visit that we had a 1 in 3 possibility of having a chromosomal defect. and so the information we received was that the baby had trisomy 18, which is a pretty devastating diagnosis. A lot of the babies will not make it to term or won't live beyond a few days. Very few have a first birthday or are able to live independently beyond that. So we obviously did a lot of research and cried a lot and did a lot of kind of talking within. And I knew that to be a mom to that baby, who was a girl, I had to let her go. And we scheduled the abortion. We waited a little over a week for an appointment, so I was into my second trimester, and we had it at a hospital, and I received compassionate care. And the saddest part, there were lots of sad parts, but it was really difficult that my husband couldn't be with me. One of the reasons that I share my story is because I think that we have an opportunity to be so much nicer to each other as people. And I think that if we could return abortion as a personal choice to women and their families, then we would actually be able to support each other in such amazing ways. I'd like to see us be able to talk more about abortion and loss of pregnancy. And I'd like to help people understand that there are just so many circumstances that bring someone to make this choice, and that you really don't know when it might affect your family or your neighbor or your daughter. And I wanted to speak out because there are so many people that can't, and I'm fortunate to have a supportive family and group of friends and people that support me through talking about this and my process. And I hope that maybe by sharing our stories, we can make space for other stories, and maybe we can fully change the conversation here.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing your story. I have a question, just to follow up. So now that you've shared your story, and you said that for you it's really important that you support others in sharing their stories, how have you started to do that?
Well, I have just really started to speak more openly, and I have also connected with some groups doing this work. I hope I'm a writer, and writing about this has been a really important part of my healing process. I hope that as time goes on, I'm able to really help others through writing and maybe open conversations. I think one of the things that was so hard for me after I had an abortion is that I was just so alone, and it wasn't like somebody said, there's a group you can go to and talk about this. So I'd like to really be more active in the movement and help bring people together.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you for sharing your story and the work that you're doing in your community.
Thank you
Jess,
so much.
What's next?
Now, we are thrilled to be able to share a pre-recorded video from Cecile Richards, president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Cecile recently shared her own abortion story in Elle magazine, and she's sharing it with us again today.
Hi, I'm Cecile Richards, president of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. For too long, abortion has been debated as a political topic or dismissed as a social issue, and women's voices have been shut out from a conversation about our lives. It's time we spoke out. I had an abortion. It was the right decision for me and my husband, and it wasn't a difficult decision. But before I joined Planned Parenthood, I didn't really talk about it except with family and close friends. But today, I'm telling my story because it's important for women to know they aren't alone, and for politicians to know that when they debate women's access to abortion, they're talking about me and millions of others. No woman should ever be forced to justify her reason for having an abortion. The decision is hers alone. We have a long way to go to end abortion stigma in this country, and that starts with each one of us. Sharing our own stories if we choose to, and creating space for other women to share theirs. It's time for a national conversation about abortion on our terms. Let's show everyone who the real experts are. Us.
Helping
My name
to
is Sonia
shatter
Renee,
the stigma.
and
Carly, will you
again-
introduce our next video?
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Now we have a video from Sonia Renee, a performance poet, activist, and transformation leader. Sonia is the founder of The Body Is Not an Apology.
My name is Sonia Renee. And I'm excited to be part of the 1 in 3 campaign. I wanted to talk a little bit about these 2 poems that I've put in for the 1 in 3 campaign, and a little bit about my own personal story and how they came about. When I was a sophomore in college, I had an unexpected and unintended pregnancy. I was dating a guy who was a dishwasher at Red Lobster at the time. He was adorable and cute, but not particularly responsible. I was putting myself through college. My mother suffered from crack addiction, and my father was pretty not involved in my life. And I just knew that I was not in a position to take care of a baby. I was so clear about that. I was so clear that my way out of the circumstances that were so historical in my family of poverty and struggle were being able to get this college degree and start my life. And I knew that I was not going to be able to do that and to have a baby. I didn't have the support, I didn't have the financial resources or the emotional currency to make that happen. And so I chose an abortion. And at the time, there wasn't really a shame about having the abortion. You almost didn't get a chance to feel ashamed because you just didn't talk about it. You didn't tell anybody, right? Like, I remember that I was very, very sick, and my father lived in the area. We weren't close, but he did live in the area. And I was really, really sick in the beginning, and he brought me like soup or something in the dorms. I'm living in the dorm. I'm like laid out on the public couches in the lobby and falling apart. And I just remember, like, there's no one that I can tell about this. There's no one to share this with. And so my boyfriend at the time drove me to the clinic. He dropped me off and he picked me up when I was done. And that was absolutely, that moment was the end of that relationship, which made it really clear, like, oh, when hard things happen, this is not the person that you want to have with you. And so I just spent so many years sort of in secrecy about it. And then when I started working for an organization in Washington, D.C. called Helping Individual Prostitutes Survive, I was doing HIV prevention with sex workers in the district. And I happened to be on my way to work, and this campaign was on the bus, this Women Deserve Better Than Abortion campaign. And I remembered at first thinking, oh, like, it was like women deserve jobs and resources and care. And I was like, oh, wow, that's awesome. Wonder what this project is. And I went back to my office at work and I looked it up online, and I was enraged. I felt duped because it took me to this anti-abortion website, this anti-choice website. I just was so enraged that they had taken time out of my day, that they emotionally manipulated me, and that they had no idea about the circumstances and environment in which a decision like choosing to terminate an abortion happens. It felt so violating. And that moment I got on the computer and I wrote What Women Deserve. And it was the first time that I really allowed myself to be angry about how contradictory our messaging around reproductive justice is and about reproductive rights. How utterly absurd it is for someone who knows nothing about my life to propose what I should do with my body. And so it really was an opportunity to sort of be as angry as we should be around people who would restrict our rights to our bodies. And so I sort of stayed in the angry, ranty, activist phase for a long time, because I feel like in some ways, when breaking out of our silence sometimes happens externally, and then that external work moves inward. And so it wasn't until recently, maybe in the last year and a half, that I decided to write Why We Hold Our Tongues. Because I needed this large platform to talk about the injustice around public policy around reproductive rights. But I also needed to give voice to my truth, to those moments in my story that led to that decision. And I needed to be heard and be validated and no longer be asked to sit in silence. Because silence is the equivalent of shame. It's the same. We don't want to tell it because it's wrong or it's bad or it was something you shouldn't have done. And none of those things are true. My choice to terminate that pregnancy was one of the smartest decisions I've ever made in my life. And does that mean that I don't ever think about it? No. Does it mean that I don't imagine what my life would be like with a 15-year-old or whatever today? Of course I do. And I am clear that this vibrant, full, majestic life that I have today is in part a result of making the decision that was best for me in that moment at that time. And I'm so excited that the 1 in 3 campaign exists. I'm so excited that the 1 out of every 3 women who has had or will have an abortion is going to be given the opportunity to give voice to their experience, to that unique, personal, powerful, transformative moment when we decided what was best for us, without shame, without stigma, and unapologetically. And I'm grateful to be able to do that today.
Sonia Renee, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and helping to shatter the stigma. Now I'd like to share a multimedia story from Sarah, a contributor to the 1 in 3 campaign, beautifully illustrated by Alex Kronz-Kapler.
About 5 years ago, I got pregnant on continuous hormone birth control. I wasn't getting a period because of the pill, but I could tell something was off. Turned out I was 8 weeks along. I was in a committed relationship and I love my partner. Now we are married and the parents of a beautiful 19-month-old boy. But 5 years ago, I knew I wasn't ready to be a mother. I believed then, and I still do, that bringing a child into the world is a tremendous, unspeakably important act that requires incredible will and love and intention. I didn't feel ready to commit myself fully to that act 5 years ago, and I was afraid that doing so without full commitment or will would damage my relationship with both my partner and the child we would bring into the world. So I opted to end the pregnancy. It was a sad, strange experience, and while I don't think back on it with fondness, I do not regret my choice one iota. As a mom, I know now just how hard and brilliant and intense motherhood is, and I am proud to have exercised my right to choose twice. Once it ended a pregnancy, once it brought a beautiful boy into the world. No regrets. And I will fight for my right and the right of women everywhere to choose again. Sarah.
Thank you to both Sarah and Alex. Now we have a statement from Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, representing Washington, D.C. Roe v. Wade declared access to safe abortion and reproductive services to be a constitutional right, has been one of the greatest achievements for American women. But the 41-year-old landmark Supreme Court decision will slip away without stepping up action. Reproductive freedom could become a right for one generation alone. Abortion is still a right. It should never be a stigma. For this year's 1 in 3 abortion Speakout, let us encourage women to speak out about their experiences and confront the abortion stigma. If we stand together, we can break down the stigma and preserve our constitutional right to reproductive freedom. These are our bodies, our lives, our stories, our right. We cannot let anyone take that away from us. Thank you, Congresswoman Holmes Norton, for standing with the people, sharing their stories today, for helping to end the silence and engage in a new conversation about abortion in our society, and for fighting for safe, legal, and affordable abortion access. We are honored to know that we have you by our side.
Joining us by Skype now is Candace, who will share her story. Candace, start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Last summer, I waited in line for over 12 hours to testify in front of my state Senate panel against the passage of HB2. I had told them about how my mother had decided at the very last moment not to terminate her pregnancy with me. And I had told them my own abortion story, which had occurred when I was 21 and was in no way ready to parent. At that point in my life, I was living on ramen noodles and payday loans. And I was working a job where I commuted 2 hours each way by train, a job where I didn't have health insurance. I talked to them about autonomy and I talked to them about choice. But in the end, as we all know, HB2 passed. And over this last year, like many other Texans, I've spent a lot of time doing what I can to help fight against the devastating impact of its restrictions. Restrictions that I never thought were going to personally impact me. I've never been shy about telling the story about my abortion from when I was 21. It never occurred to me really to be embarrassed to talk about being too young and poor and underinsured to parent. Almost a decade later, however, I had found myself in a situation where I had lost a little bit of that bravado. I realized I was pregnant again in the spring due to a combination of just how far along I was and a lack of availability in the clinics in the DFW area. It was decided that I was going to travel to California, where my then partner lived, to undergo my surgical abortion. Now, I realized just how lucky I am to have done this. The places in Texas that access is most hindered are now also vastly under-resourced. The people in the Rio Grande Valley can't exactly hop on a plane and fly 1,500 miles away and have an abortion. So I know how lucky I was to have been able to do what I did. So I went to California, I had my abortion, and I came home. And eventually my life carried on like it does. And suddenly the anniversary of the filibuster rolled around and I began to receive countless emails asking for personal accounts from the passing of HB2. And every single time I saw one, it stabbed at my heart a little bit. But every single time I hit delete. It was really hard for me to admit to myself that even though I had spent years of my life dedicated to the pro-choice movement, I'd never really looked at my choice as just a choice outside of its particular set of circumstances before. That is until a conversation with a colleague of mine led to her confiding in me that she was in fact pregnant and really unsure of what to do. She asked me if I'd ever actually had an abortion. And I had to pause for a minute and think about her question, because my initial instinct was to tell her the story that I had rehearsed so many times, the one that I had shared in front of that state Senate committee that day in July, the one that was so much easier for people to swallow because it gave them justifications for my actions. Because I was young and because I was poor, because at that point in my life, I just wasn't in any place to have a child. But she was 33 and a professional like me with a career and a life of her own. And I knew she wasn't going to relate to that story. That talking about a girl who was 21 and who didn't have her life in any sort of situation where she felt comfortable or safe raising a baby wasn't going to resonate with her. So I decided to tell her both stories. I talked about being 21 and poor and underinsured and not in any way ready to parent. And I talked to her about being 30 and just not wanting to have a baby. And what that has taught me and what I've come to realize over the past couple of months is that there isn't really any difference to the story of my abortion when I was 21 and the one that I had when I was 30. That it doesn't matter if my choice is palatable, if people accept it, or even if it makes them uncomfortable. And that by sharing both stories, I'm reaching more people. People who otherwise might feel alienated and alone and scared that they don't have any sort of community. That by not allowing myself to fall into the trap of justifying my choices simply because I have made them, that I'm telling the world that my decision doesn't need to be justified at all because it's mine and mine alone.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Candace. I just had a quick follow-up question because I do feel like a lot of us find ourselves in this trap of having to justify the choices that we make. So I was just wondering if you had to, because there are people out there that are listening right now. If you had to say, a couple wise words of advice, to, someone who's afraid to share their story, kind of what would that advice actually be to them?
I think for me, it's knowing that for every person who might judge you, who might say something that, makes you feel unsure, that but just what this day is about, that 1 in 3 of us go through this process, that we're not alone, and that, there's this whole movement of community amongst the people who support each other. I think that it's the more we speak out, the more you're going to realize that you're not an island, that none of us are.
Thank you again, Candace, for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you guys so much for doing it.
So now I'd like to take a moment to learn more about the person sitting next to me, who's been my co-host, Carly. So Carly, can you tell us just a little bit about the work that you've been doing with the 1 in 3 campaign? Because you've been working on this campaign for almost 2 years now, right?
Yeah, so I've been working on this campaign for almost 2 years now, as you just said, primarily at the University of Michigan. And it's been a life-changing experience. I have been doing reproductive health work since I was pretty young, around 15 years old. But nothing has impacted me the way that the 1 in 3 campaign has. Doing abortion destigmatization work, I think, is so unique and special because we're not talking about abortion on a theoretical level. We're talking about it on a really personal, individualized level. So it's bringing it from the really politicized, alienated atmosphere back to a home base of, when we make policies around abortion access, we're affecting real people. We're affecting a lot of people, actually. Like the statistic is 1 in 3. And so I've been hosting speakouts on my campus. The past 2 years, I've been hosting small dinner parties where we talk about stigma. We talk about abortion access, where people, are in their lives. And I'm meeting people where they're at, not talking above them in any way when talking about policy, but talking about their communities, their friends. And it's proven to be much more effective than any of the work I was doing prior.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people that are signing the pledge right now and are probably tuning in and getting activated in this moment. So kind of like, what advice would you give to them to kind of, what's that next step that they should take after signing the pledge?
Yeah, so I think after signing the pledge, a good thing to do is just being a really open resource for people, letting people in your community know that you're someone who will not judge, will not shame, will not stigmatize if anyone did want to share their story with you. So sharing things on Facebook, letting your friends know that you're involved in this campaign, letting them know that you watched the Speakout today, letting them know that you're someone who's engaged in this conversation, who wants to have this conversation, who wants to be a support person for anyone in their community. And I think as long as people who've had abortions who feel like they have to be silent because of the stigma, once they know that they have someone out there who is willing to listen, no judgment, no questions asked, I think that's one of the most important ways to be there for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you're doing some amazing work, and it's really nice. There's someone out there in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, holding it down for reproductive health and justice. So.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jess. If you'd like to support my work and that of many other campus groups, please consider donating to the 1 in 3 campaign by visiting www.1in3campaign.org. And now we have a pre-recorded video from Kirsha, who shares her story.
Hi, Advocates for Youth. My name is Kirsha Dibel, and I'm going to share my story. I am from a small town. It's called New Philadelphia, Ohio. It's one of those towns that's known for high school football, cornfields. My little brother Jaden, he had 2 goats named Dodge and Skittles growing up. It's your quintessential small farm town. And growing up, the only thing that I wanted to do was to get the heck up out of there as fast as possible once I graduated from high school. So in 2005, I moved the farthest point possible to Cincinnati, Ohio, where I started my undergrad career at the University of Cincinnati. And my freshman year, my stepmom, she picked me up from my residence hall in Calhoun Hall, and she took me to Planned Parenthood. And we pull up, and I'll never forget, there were 4 protesters standing outside, chanting at us, holding the botched fetus sign. I'm sure we've all seen that before. And the first thing I wanted to do was call my father and say, where in the world did this woman take me? Please come pick me up. But instead, I went in and I trusted her. She was getting her PhD in nursing at the time, so I knew that I was going to be safe. And in fact, I was. My services were phenomenal, and the staff were friendly, non-judgmental, and they took care of me. But the entire time that I was in there, I felt frustrated, I felt conflicted, and I wasn't necessarily sure why. But I knew one thing. I knew that the folks that were on the outside looked nothing like the people that were on the inside. One, they were white men, and we were all women of color inside. And they were men, right? They were men, and we were women. And I just felt, I didn't understand the language. I didn't know really what reproductive health was, but I knew that something didn't feel right. And so I started getting involved, and I started volunteering for the organization. And I essentially became this poster child on my campus for sexual and reproductive health issues. I got really involved. I became a resident advisor, and people could come and talk to me about anything. And sometimes I had residents that were coming to talk to me about, STIs, pregnancy scares, et cetera, et cetera. And, I felt like I knew it all, right? And so my senior year, I had just got accepted into the #1 social work program in the country at Washington University in St. Louis, and I was getting ready to go do a dual master's social work, master of public health program, and I found out I was pregnant. And I was in a relationship, long-term relationship, and we had been together for a few years. But I knew that the only thing that I needed to do for myself at that moment was to have an abortion. And unfortunately for my partner, that was the worst choice that I could ever make. He said that it was selfish, that I should be ashamed of myself, that he couldn't believe that I was killing his child. But I knew I was smart enough, thank God, that I had a family at Planned Parenthood who was there for me. I was smart enough to know that that was bullshit, that I'm the only person that got to make the decisions about myself, and that nobody, and especially no man, was going to tell me what I couldn't do with my body. So I had an abortion, and for me, it wasn't the most difficult decision that I've ever made. I knew what I needed to do for myself at that moment, what I needed to do in order to ensure that my family in the future was what I needed, was what I wanted at that specific moment. And so I had an abortion. I can remember walking out of the health center for the first time in my life feeling like, I was 23 years old, feeling like I was the only person that got to make these decisions, and feeling like I had so much power. And and just like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And I don't feel like that is self-indulgence. That to me is self-preservation. And now I have this incredible opportunity where I get to work for the organization that helps me in so many different ways throughout my life. And it's just an incredible opportunity where I get to really give back and allow people to really stand up and speak out for what they believe. And that's my story.
Kirsha, thank you for sharing your story with us and helping to shatter the stigma. Now we have a short documentary from filmmaker Tani Akita. Tani is the founder of the Immediate Justice, a summer workshop and community outreach program for girls devoted to revolutionizing sex education through filmmaking. Tani travels to Wichita, Kansas to interview those who knew and worked with the late Dr. George Tiller. Dr. Tiller was the medical director of Women's Healthcare Services in Wichita, Kansas. The clinic was one of only 3 nationwide to provide late-term abortion care for women who needed them. On May 31st, 2009, as Dr. Tiller served as an usher for Sunday morning services at his church in Wichita, he was shot and killed by an anti-abortion activist. Dr. Tiller's life and work helped so many women and inspired many to carry on his effort.
I got my abortion for multiple reasons, but one of the huge reasons was after my rape, I wasn't prepared to share my body for 9 months with another being. I felt like I had already put my body and my spirit through so much that I don't think that psychologically I could have made it through a pregnancy. I was angry and I was afraid, and I literally had nothing left to give. If I could look back and tell my younger self something, I would tell her to ease up. I would tell her to give herself a break. I would tell her that the abortion was one day, and that I would tell her that life will go on and good things will happen, and that she will find love and she will feel safe again. I love the clinic volunteer work I do, and I just like to be that person that can say, I know you feel alone, but you're not.
1 in 3 women of reproductive age has an abortion. I think it's important for people to know that, yes, a lot of people have abortions. And every morning there are protesters out there. I joked when I first started here that I was going to have to get myself a Kevlar vest. I mean, this particular clinic has been the site of a bombing, a shooting, and then of course the doctor who founded it was murdered at his church.
I really enjoyed working with Dr. Tiller, mainly because he was a man of deep, deep compassion. He would ask me in the afternoons when the clinic was quiet, What is the whole purpose of theology? Why do we do this? And I said, oh, well, to do this, to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And I just went on. And he waited for me to stop my long dialogue. And he said, well, maybe it's just to serve.
Dr. Tiller was a very compassionate man. He believed in solutions to the problems that we faced. You know, and I talked to him at one time about, oh, you know, wouldn't it just be easier if the clinic moved? But he didn't want to do that because, you know, this was his home. He was from Wichita, and it was a matter of principle. And so, you know, I think he was a great teacher in that no matter where you are, people deserve quality care, and he was going to do that. Well, Dr. Tiller was assassinated on May 31st of 2009 by an anti-choice fanatic from the Kansas City area. And this person had been stalking him, as it turned out, and actually assassinated him in his church. I think so many people felt incredibly lost. And I loved him, so. After a lot of trial and error and soul searching, we finally decided that the next right thing to do would be to work to establish and expand access for women in the Midwest and the South. I had this moment, you know, yesterday when we were in Oklahoma City and having meetings when, you know, we had one of our physicians there and one of our other staff members there, and then we have other people sitting around the table just talking about the possibilities and networking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is working, and these are great people who are coming together. And so it was just one of these moments where I was like, yes, this was the right path, it is the right path.
Thanks for sharing that powerful work, Tawny. It's great to hear that the work of Dr. Tiller is continuing. Joining us now in the studio is Michelle Kinsey Bruns. Michelle, please start whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Carly. To tell my abortion story of the abortion that I had when I was 18, you probably have to go back to when I was 15, because up until that point, I lived in an abusive home situation with a stepfather who was a violent drunk, and he was pretty brutal to my mother and me. And so the cops were called to our house a lot. I would go to school with 2 black eyes or with choke marks around my throat, and I really decided or thought from a young age that I was just never going to make it out of my childhood alive. I was kind of convinced that was the case. And so I was a mess. My childhood was a real mess, and I probably my first suicide attempt was when I was 10 years old or so, which wasn't a very good try, but I got better at trying. And by the time I was 13, I ended up in the hospital for a few weeks, just feeling that that my pain wasn't seen and that life was hopeless and I saw no way out, thinking of that in this 13-year-old kind of way. And so I was a real mess. But when I was 15, my mother made an attempt to leave my stepfather. It wasn't her first attempt, and it wasn't her last. She went back again, but I wasn't going back. And so at 15, I ended up with some other family in Georgia who were kind enough to take me in, and God bless them. But they were super poor. They were very poor, so poor that the little cousin who I was moving in with, his bed was the couch, and he gave that up for me. He slept on the floor for 2 years while I slept on his couch. And so I knew that I was taking up space there. I got a job and did the work that I could and found the money that I could to pay my share, to pay my own way. But I knew that I was taking up space, and that I had to get out as soon as I could, one way or the other. And so what actually ended up happening was that I might have been a mess in my head, but I was very good at school. And so I set a goal for myself to graduate high school a year early and go to college. And I achieved half of it. I did graduate high school a year early because I was good at school, but but there was very little college education in my family, and I literally had no idea that there was such a thing as student loans that you could defer until you were done, for example. I just didn't know. My people didn't know. And so I did scrape together the money for the first quarter of college, but that was it. So I started college the week after I turned 17. 3 months later, I was a college dropout. And I had no particular place to go. I had this poor family. I couldn't go back and take up space again, and no marketable skills with which to feed myself. You know, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I ended up moving in with a boyfriend. That's where I had to go, and he wasn't a bad person, but I had no business living with him. my head was still a mess, and I was quite young. And so unfortunately, I did get pregnant some months later. In fact, it was right before my 18th birthday that I got pregnant, and I'm so grateful that it wasn't any sooner, when I was not that close to that magical line of 18, because my legal status as a 17-year-old living apart from my legal guardians was always a bit of a gray area. For example, I was able, recognizing that I needed some help to heal and to get better, I was able to check myself into a psych ward at 17. I could sign myself in, but when I wanted out because I didn't feel safe there any longer, it took my mother to sign me out. So that's what it was like to be 17 and on my own. And so I'm 17, I'm pregnant, but I'm just about to turn 18. But I didn't handle it well because I was still a mess. And so I just remember finding out I was pregnant and lying on the floor in the bathroom of the crappy little house that I shared with my boyfriend on my $4.50 an hour salary, and sobbing and telling him that I was going to kill myself. Surprise. But it would be his choice. Did I do that before giving birth or after, if he wanted to raise a baby? But I couldn't. I was going to kill myself. But none of that happened. Instead, I got an abortion in Atlanta, and there were some hoops to jump through. For example, I was a mess. I overslept and missed my appointment, and I called, "Oh, can I come in late?" And they said, by law, it has to be 24 hours, so you have to come back tomorrow. But I got the abortion, and I'm so grateful every day. When I tell this story to people, they hear a lot of trauma, and they hear a lot of tragedy, and they hear a lot of pain, and a lot of times they'll say something to me like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And the thing that I feel is so important to state clearly about my abortion experience is that the abortion was not the tragedy or the trauma. It was a tragedy for me to grow up in this abusive household. It was a tragedy for me to leave home at 15. It was a tragedy for me to end up pregnant with an unsuitable man at the age of 17 years old with no money, no skills, no future, and my head barely screwed on straight. The abortion itself, it was a mercy, it was a blessing. It gave me back that life I thought I would never have, that I thought I'd never survive to see as a kid, and now I have, and I'm grateful every single day.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
And now you do some work as a clinic escort, right? So now you've kind of transitioned to help other people.
Yeah.
So what does some of that work look like?
Sure. I started doing that work in fact, in 2009, when Dr. Tiller was killed on May 31st of 2009. I decided I needed to be doing more. I'd always been pro-choice, going back to Catholic grade school, in fact. The nuns loved me. But no matter, I was pro-choice, and then I lived those values in my own life. And then years later, this political battle became violent again. I remembered the 90s. I remembered anti-choice terrorism, that many doctors were actually shot and killed, and fire bombings and arsons. And so in 2009, when it came up again, I thought, oh my goodness, I thought we were past this as a society. I thought that we had evolved, but apparently not. And so that very week, the first week of June, I signed up to volunteer as a clinic escort, and at the same time I actually snagged the Twitter handle clinic escort because I wanted people to know that it's still a problem. I wanted people to see what I could see because I felt at the time like people still thought that was a problem. It was back in the 90s. And so I started doing it, and it just so happened, I didn't go looking for a bad clinic. I didn't go looking for anything in particular except the one that was 10 minutes from my house in New Jersey, which people might think was a liberal state. But I can tell you that we had up to 36 protesters at any given time. There was an evangelical biker gang, so they were kind of very menacing. I feel that they kind of dressed up to purposely be scary. They'd have gore signs 6 feet by 12 feet high, and just screaming the most hateful things at entering patients. And I saw that there, and then I started to travel and do the same work. So now I've escorted at clinics in 8 states around the country. And what you see is we keep talking throughout this entire campaign about stigma and shame, and the people who hang out outside of a clinic are really stigma and shame personified. They want to alter the course of a person's story or their experience and make it worse and make them hurt and make it painful. And for me, it's a real outrage. And so it's so meaningful to me to be able to make space for a woman to walk, for anybody to walk safely into a clinic without being harassed. The same way I feel strongly that by telling the stories of our abortion experiences, we can make safe space for others to tell theirs as well.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing your story and for the work that you do and being unapologetically pro-choice.
Yeah, thanks.
So now we'd like to welcome Mary Cruz, who will share her story via Skype. Mary Cruz, please start whenever you're ready.
Okay. So first, I'd just like to say thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my story. I actually had my abortion a little over a year ago. I found out I was pregnant, and, you know, being a 25-year-old woman, I think it's fair to say women have their, you know, they have pregnancy scares now and then, and I had just never seen that plus sign. So when I did, I was really shocked. And what I actually felt was a lot of, well, first of all, I felt an immediate sense of, you know, I'm not going to keep this baby. But on top of that, I also felt an immediate sense of attachment towards the baby. I told my partner about it. I felt like, one, you know, we were not in a financially stable situation, and he, you know, he still hasn't even finished college yet. But more than anything, I wasn't ready to be a mother, and I'm still not ready to be a mother. And so I had a few folks who asked me if I'd considered doing adoption. And the short answer is no. The long answer is basically, you know, feeling that sense of attachment already, just immediately upon knowing that I'm pregnant, and imagining myself carrying this child for 9 months and actually having to give him up to somebody else really scared me. And I've had depression in the past, and I thought that this was going to be something that made me go back into a depression. So I knew immediately that that's not what I wanted to do. And I really don't feel selfish for saying that, because I feel like the other side of the movement comes at this from this perspective of, you know, abortion can be traumatizing, when in reality, so can some of these other options like adoption. So I went and I had my abortion on a Tuesday, and my partner and I were walking into the clinic, and there was a group of pro-life protesters outside. And one of them, a gentleman, shouted, "You don't have to do this." And he sounded concerned, but that just sort of upset me more. You know, this guy who's feigning concern to push his agenda, who doesn't actually know our situation, who doesn't know that we do have to do this. And there was so much irony there. As far as the procedure itself, it was really just easy. I had decided to have the surgical procedure, and the hardest part about it is right before they make you take these little pills, and I've never been good at taking pills, so that for me was pretty difficult. And then, you know, the emotions of the abortion itself, despite never having any doubts in my mind that that's what I wanted to do, I felt a lot of sadness. Right after I had the abortion, I went into the bathroom and I lifted up my shirt to see my stomach in the mirror, and I started crying because I knew there was no baby there. And I kind of mourned for that day, I would say. You know, me and my boyfriend just kind of vegged out on the couch, and we were both really sad. But after that, it isn't really something that I've thought about that much. when I do think about it, it's really with a lot of relief, because I'm so glad that I'm not a mother right now. I don't know if it's something that I'll ever want to take on. And you know, I do occasionally revisit the memory with some sadness, but never any regret. I'm really glad that I made the decision that I made. And I also was very lucky in that I had a really good supportive group of people who, you know, just were there for me, making me smile, making me laugh, making me feel better. I did have one person who really lashed out at me and kind of crushed me, you know, and they did it because they were hurt and they love me. But at the same time, you know, I still don't think that was the right way to react. So that was really heartbreaking for me. And I remember they said that I shouldn't have told anybody and that I shouldn't share my story. And when I left, I thought, I'm never going to tell anybody about this again. But because I felt that way, I knew that meant that I had to. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'm so happy to see that more women are telling their stories, because I think it's important and it needs to continue.
Yeah. Mary Cruz, thank you so much for sharing your story and helping to shatter the silence.
Thank you.
Jess, I would love to know a little bit more about you, since we haven't gone into that yet. So why are you involved in this work, and why do you think it's important that we destigmatize abortion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in this work because I am the 1 in 3, first of all. And really also it's, you know, there's so many women of color who lack access to affordable and safe abortion services, health services in general. And, you know, it's a part of the core of the work that I do at the Black Youth Project 100. You know, we're focused specifically on Black youth, and a big part of that, and we say it in our political work, is that, you know, we do this from operating from a queer and a feminist lens. And so part of that means putting women at the forefront of the work that we do. And when we talk about that, we talk about it in very specific terms. And for me, this has to be at the center of it. You know, yes, we're talking about jobs and we're talking about education, but we have to talk about healthcare too, because, you know, this is one of our issues. I cannot think about anything else if I am not healthy, if I do not have access to the services that I need. And so, you know, I can't just talk about the work, I kind of got to do the work too. So that's kind of how I found my way into this.
Nice. And I think that's amazing in the way of ensuring that we have an intersectional approach and an intersectional lens when we're talking about abortion and abortion access. One more question. What is your hope for story sharing? What do you hope to see societally in your community come from destigmatizing through story sharing?
Yeah, my first hope is that people can actually get the access they need to safe and affordable abortion services, and that people can feel comfortable even having the conversations. You know, I talked about my abortion story once in Baltimore. My dad's originally from Baltimore. I was there, and you know, it was the first real time I had talked about it publicly. And you know, I just told the story, and it was mostly older women that were in the room. There were a few young women in the room, and then, you know, at the end, there was this girl, and she was kind of like tentatively trying to come up to me, and she came up to me and she said, you know, I just found out I was pregnant, and, you know, we were at the library, and she was like, I was just in the library actually just trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was thinking I had to run away from home, and I heard your story, and I feel like I can actually, you know, have a conversation now with my parents and figure out what I need to do. And I was like, I was just shocked that even something as simple as telling my own story could affect somebody else in that way. And so my hope is that when people, you know, hear the stories that we're sharing and, you know, see the work that other people are doing, that people, you know, can at least feel comfortable starting to have, you know, those conversations at home and, you know, at their places of work and their places of worship, and that hopefully that then, you know, builds out the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Jess, thank you so much for sharing that information about yourself. And I'd like to thank you for, after 2 hours as a co-host on set, is leaving us, sadly. Thank you for hosting today, Jess, and thank you for all the work that you do in communities everywhere to help destigmatize abortion and just make this world a better place for everyone in it.
Thank you. This has been such an honor to be a part of this.